Welcome to the Bringing Intimacy Back show, where intimacy is real. If you desire to intimately connect with yourself, your significant other, children, family, friends, community, and higher power, this show is for you. We explore intimate topics, inspiring life stories, spirituality, and insightful tips on strengthening relationships. The show is hosted by Dr. April and her co-host, Coach K. Let's get this episode of the Bringing Intimacy Back show started. We share with you today the secret power to intimacy to create a life you love or love the life you create. Now, here's your host, Dr. April, and co-host, Coach K.
Welcome to the Bringing Intimacy Back show, where intimacy is real. How are you doing, Coach K?
I am doing great. Just had my Michael Jackson concert with myself. And how are you?
I'm doing good. I know I was listening to some 80s music, also some Prince and Madonna. Yeah. So tell me about this Michael Jackson concert.
I think I saw some post and it was about Michael Jackson. So I went to Spotify and I found the Michael Jackson channel. And it's over 5 hours. And so whenever I'm in creative mode, music is what drives me. So me, myself, and I'm pretty sure the people in the building were not appreciative, but we had a full-blown concert.
And sometimes you need that kind of stuff just to relax and just, yes.
It does. It releases. So it makes you feel light. The creativity can just flow. I don't know what I sounded like per se, but I know that I pumped out some great emails.
Good. And it also helps. I know, like in my area right now, a lot of people have been so emotional with a variety of things. Yes. Yeah. The music sometimes it allows people to calm down. You know?
It really does.
Yeah.
It
And
really does.
enters you into the present moment, which is the only thing that we have right now.
It does. It brings you right forward. And then listening to some of the lyrics, it's, as a child, 80s baby, you're like, you just sing it because it's catchy. But then you realize, oh my gracious, this is relevant now. Okay, I love this. I feel this. I understand this. His man in the mirror. Yes, every once in a while you have to remind yourself, take a look right at yourself, see through to yourself and start there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. Even Thriller was I saw that video recently. And the excitement of that and the starting of a new relationship and how that works out and how in the end it's like, oh my gosh, I don't even know who this person is.
Yes, indeed. And I think Madonna may be my next one. I love her.
Specifically. So before we get into the topic of today, one of the things I always highlight is Charity of the Month. And our Charity of the Month is the American Red Cross. And I have to thank the American Red Cross so much for what they do, especially as this month. And we decided American Red Cross before I knew there was going to be a hurricane this month. But the American Red Cross has been down in Southwest Florida and all throughout Florida, and they help with meals, county disaster, resources, medical stuff. So if you're wanting to volunteer and help out, the American Red Cross, www.redcross.org, is a great organization.
Much needed, and I'm glad that they're still around.
Yes, definitely. So today's topic, we are talking about the emotional echoes and stages of vulnerability, which is exciting because I think many times when you're connecting with someone and once you're even in a relationship or in a long-term relationship, it requires a lot of vulnerability.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Right.
And I love that they're going to talk about their stages of it.
Yes.
That part is going to be very, very good to hear that part.
Right. And sometimes when you explain about vulnerability, people don't realize that, some people don't realize that you have to have emotions. You all have emotions. I mean, they all have emotions, but how to identify that.
Right. Yeah, it's definitely going to be exciting.
Yes. So I'm so excited to have, in the month of October, we've been highlighting couples. And so I have a couple that I had on last time that is going to come on again. So when you come back, off this break, we're going to introduce you again to Dr. Ray and Jean, and we're going to talk about the stages of vulnerability and the emotional echoes. Be back in a moment.
Life can be overwhelming sometimes. We think we are a burden to others. We think that it's better to hide it and suppress our hurt, but it's not. As Cape Coral therapists, we will provide you with quality, confidential counseling services in a relaxing and peaceful environment. Talk to a professional today. Book an appointment on www.capecoraltherapist.com or call 239-565-6921.
Hi, welcome back to the Being an Intimacy Show, where intimacy is real. Welcome, Dr. Ray and Jean. How you guys doing?
Good. How are you?
Doing great.
Thanks so much, Dr. April, Coach K. Thanks for having us. Thanks for having us on again.
Yes, I know. Yes. You guys are one of my favorite couples.
Oh,
thank you. That's awesome. And it's been quite a while. I think like time flies, right? I think it's been like a year or something like that.
Yes, yeah. Well, tell us again about you guys. I know you guys were married on Valentine's Day.
Valentine's Day, yes. This is before we even started working with couples. So it wasn't planned. It wasn't a marketing gimmick. Right? And actually, we're celebrating our 25th wedding anniversary this coming Valentine's Day.
All right. That's awesome.
Yes.
Yeah. We still haven't decided on where yet. We're kind of thinking about maybe Fiji, but we'll see.
Awesome. See. Yes. Yeah. And tell again the story. I know that both of you weren't in this field before. Right.
Well, when we actually first got together, we were actually in the mental health field. We were actually working in community mental health at that time. Right. And we got both our master's degrees, and then in community mental health, we were just thrown into working with couples. So you were assigned a couple, you had no training in working with couples whatsoever, and you're sitting there in front of the couple, and you have no idea what to do. They sit there fighting in front of you, and you're just feeling lost, right? And so we out of that experience, we both decided that we wanted to create kind of a better model in working with couples. And that's what led us to develop Couple Synergy. And the way that we work with couples is I work with the husbands and Jean works with the wives and individually. And then we come together, the four of us, in a program we call Couple to Couple. And we're able to kind of help eliminate gender bias, which naturally happens when there's only one therapist in the room.
And after working with couples for, well over 20 years, we learn really fundamental things that we don't know as people, and relationships have changed so much since what our families have shown us. And we found a way to help couples change even faster through different modalities and a lot through teaching. So we have a home study course, a weekend intensive, which is incredible. And then finally the face-to-face stuff, which is the deep dive into very personally into your relationship. And a lot of people are out there, and I heard a statistic, only 15% of married people are actually happily married. And it's because they're stuck and they don't know how to have those difficult conversations. Mm-hmm. And you guys probably had the same experience of coming into this space, as opposed to, it's so much easier to talk about, oh, I can help you make a bunch of money, or I can help you level up, or whatever. We talk about people's relationships and people are like, but it is the most rewarding thing we have and makes our life so meaningful.
Mm-hmm. Yes, definitely, to share tools and stuff. And you said how relationships have changed over time. This show's about intimacy. And I'm curious, from you guys' perspective, how have you seen intimacy in your work change over these 20 years?
Just in the last couple of years, since COVID, relationships have changed dramatically. Mm-hmm. We have couples, all couples were locked in the same house, for however long, and they had to learn some things about each other that they probably didn't know.
Yeah.
And the pressures and the stress and, all of these different factors have really contributed to this relationship crisis that we are seeing couples in.
One of our greatest assets is our attention. Mm-hmm. And one thing about our attention is where your eyeballs are.
Mm-hmm.
And most people's eyeballs are on a screen. And that's where their intimacy is drawn to. And when you feel maybe some rejection from your partner, it's so much easier to go to a screen and get soothed, whether it's social media, pornography, something like that. So that's had a huge impact on relationships, and we're seeing a lot more sexless marriages because of that,
Right.
because it just wasn't available 20 years ago. And that component is really difficult to help people navigate through, because I think that was something that affected like what we would have called perverted people that had to go drive to a theater somewhere, and now it's like on every 6-year-old's phone.
Yeah.
Right. And they were giving it away free for COVID just because.
Yeah.
Yes. And also, Gina, I was just thinking about also their, besides pornography, but people play a lot of games on their phone.
Yeah.
And they, they get stuck, and they're not turning to their partner at night. They're playing, I don't know, Gamey Crush or whatever, Candy Crush. Yeah.
And that does bring a pleasure that used to be something that was in part of our intimacy.
Right.
Absolutely. Mm-hmm.
Right.
And the focus has now become on the self versus the us, right? And so couples aren't building that us together. They're working on themselves. I'm working on me, you work on you, and then maybe we'll do something.
I'm
We'll
taking
create
my
something
selfies.
together. Right. So, that's the biggest thing here. And you know what? It is easier to work on yourself than to work on a relationship together equally as a couple. So it's not that it's easy. It does take work. And a lot of people are getting frustrated because they think, it should just click. I should just have a good relationship. Either it's good or it isn't, right? And if it isn't, then I need to dump this person, find someone else where it's supposed to be good, right? My soulmate. But
That sounds like
it doesn't work that way, right?
Mm-hmm.
Does it seem like when you're working as a couple, so when you're working on yourself, I can call myself out all day long.
Mm-hmm.
But if my partner calls me out, and it could be the same thing, how dare you?
Right.
Yeah, that exposure and
Right.
defensiveness is so big, right?
Yeah. What is it? Don't point out the plank in your neighbor's eye if you have a speck in your own, right? And that happens within couples a lot. And we say you don't keep score with a teammate.
Right.
You only keep score with an opponent. And most often the couples that we're encountering now, there is that competition that has built. And they are not working like teammates at all.
This is that emotional echoes that we talk about.
Right, exactly.
So in your upbringing, you had things that happened to you and you responded to them in a certain way, right? And this is at a time in your life where you're a child and you don't have a lot of power. And if you're hurt by your peers, if you're hurt by your family, something comes up, whether it's intentional or not, then you respond a certain way. And that response becomes hardwired into us because it's a necessary thing we need for survival. In the same way, if you touch a stove and you get burned, you have to remember, don't do that, right? And then when we get with our partners, but we're adults now, we still behave like children. And that defensiveness shows up because that's much older than us. And to learn how to use that to have a very vulnerable conversation so that you can finally bring it up for healing, because that part of our brain doesn't know the difference between a dysfunctional reaction, like isolating or, abusing drugs or alcohol or whatever things that we did to cope back then,
right,
versus let's have an honest, real conversation with someone who cares about us and wants us to become better.
And understand the connection to that past wound that is now being echoed into the present tense and being projected onto your partner. And that's typically what's happening. And the couples aren't fighting about the dishes. They're really fighting about this older wound that is echoing. And they each have a different wound or a different side of that wound, but they can't see it. They can't tie that back to that past. They're not able to connect it. Because once they're able to connect that, that's where you're truly able to understand your partner and where their wounds are. And if you're able to see your partner's wounds, then you can have compassion, right? And that's where you work together to actually heal that in each other. And that's the greatest potential in any committed partnership, is that ability to be able to heal each other's wounds from the past and create something, that's healthy moving forward.
If you ever had that experience of like yelling something out into a canyon and hearing the echo,
Right.
now imagine two people yelling out and not just one word,
Echo.
and just the chaos that happens, and it feels so personal and it feels unsafe and defensive. And that's why it's so difficult to sort through, comprehend, and get down to what's really going on.
Mm-hmm. And I know part of the difficulties, of course, is, as you said earlier, about being vulnerable. Yes. And some people may ask, well, what is being vulnerable? And I know, because you're going to talk about the stages. What is being vulnerable, and what is stage 1?
So being vulnerable is something that guys are going to run away from just across the board, right? Because you have to use the F word, the feelings word, to actually be able to open up. And you think about armor, right? You go out into this world, and the business world, corporate world, you put on this armor, and you are protecting that underbelly, that underside of you that is so vulnerable and can hurt you, right? And you do that, and you're taught that, right, in the business world, because it's necessary. You're not going to show all your cards. You're not going to be successful in business. But in a relationship, when you come home, you have to be able to take off that armor. Mm-hmm. You have to be able to open up, because your partner has the potential of being the closest human being you can ever be to, physically, emotionally, spiritually, mentally.
We talk about vulnerability also from an analogy of clothing. So you could be in a winter coat, hat, gloves, scarf, or you can be naked. And there's many stages along the way. And one of my favorite quotes was this couple that came to one of our weekend intensives, and he said, I'm running around in a winter coat and she's running around in her underwear. And she's telling everyone our business. And I'm like not talking at all, because he's shut down, and it was never a safe place for that. Yeah. And so what she really wanted, that connection with him, she was sort of trying to get it by telling everybody else their business, which kept him putting more layers on.
So for kind of a visual representative, when you think about these stages of vulnerability, you want to use the visual of a bullseye, all right? Okay. And so there are these concentric circles that go to that center bullseye. Right. And with each of these concentric circles, it requires a level of vulnerability and boundaries that you would have with certain people in your lives. So you asked about the first stage, and the first stage is the surface. We kind of have a little graphic here. So you got the surface, and the surface is what Jean was talking about, that hat, coat, gloves, and boots, right? And so when you think about that, that's that outside part of that bullseye. And at this place, it's very superficial. This is going to be someone that you just meet, at a networking event, or just someone that you're being introduced to. You don't know the person, and you're talking about just really surface things, how's the weather today? And, did you see what the Bears did the other day? It's just very superficial. There's not really much risk in your conversations.
If we go back to the analogy of clothing, maybe you're shoveling your driveway and you're all bundled up, and you see the neighbor and you say, hey, how's it going? And that's about it, right? There's not a lot of risk, and there shouldn't be a lot of exposure. And a lot of times you'll see this on these levels. It's not just about learning how to be vulnerable. It's also learning how to protect yourself when it's not safe, mm-hmm. and making sure that the right people are in the right bullseye circles relative to how you vetted them of being safe people in your life.
Yeah, and we've come across the person that just gives TMI, too much information, right?
Right, and they make
you meet them, all of a sudden they're talking to you about their mother and their brother and all this, and you're like, whoa, I don't even know you, and you're asking me to comment on these relationships that are much more intimate, and that's the feeling that we get, because it's not it doesn't feel right. You shouldn't be in more vulnerable concentric circles or stages with someone that you just met. So
right, kind of being like underdressed, like you said, for whole environment.
right,
So,
right.
yes, yes. So tell me about initial risk.
So yes, so initial risk that.
So now imagine that, you're invited into someone's home and you're taking your coat off, you're taking your hat off. Maybe you're just, going in to warm up because you have some type of transaction you have to do. And that's where we start talking about information in our lives. Oh, this is where I work. This is how many kids I have. This is where I live, things like that. Information is the first level of giving someone a piece of you that they could potentially do something with. And so if people are all behaving, we live in an area with some really nice neighbors and we're really good at sharing information and not going any further than that, which makes it really nice. And a lot of times that doesn't happen. And what happens is we get into the next layer. And the next layer is our beliefs. And we start giving our opinions about people's information, and we don't know them very well, right? We haven't really sat down. In the Japanese culture, you have to sit and socialize for a long time before you ever get to business, right? So this is now you're in the living room. You're in the living room and you're curious. And if there's a level of respect between the two people and you have a difference of opinion, but it's respected, that's still safe. But if it isn't respected, and, I like to use the analogy of a horse for some reason, like someone has a horse. Oh, I own a horse. That's just information, right? And then the next level of that, someone says, oh, that's wonderful. Horses are beautiful. I think they can do so much good in the world. And someone else says, oh, that's terrible. Those are big animals. They should run free. I think that's terrible that you own a horse. Now you're getting this opinion back, this judgment, their belief system superimposed onto you of what they know. And oftentimes when we do that, we don't know what we're talking about. We have an opinion about something because we heard it somewhere and not a real life experience with it where we can see the finer nuances. And so if you're in a relationship or you're trying to, deepen a relationship like that and someone isn't respectful of differences of opinion, dial it back up to information and bow out. Right? And always keep it there. That's much safer. And you'll see this in families where someone just has a lot of opinions.
Or you'll see it on Facebook.
Yeah.
Giving their opinions left and right, their beliefs.
And so if you have to have dinner with someone that is going to be dumping a lot of that kind of heavy stuff, have a plan to, keep it light or protect each other during that kind of stuff. Mm-hmm. And if it's happening in your primary relationship, that's a big thing. And this is typically where communication breaks down for couples, is in this level of, now we're going to talk about what we believe.
And what happens is they start distancing themselves from each other. They start censoring their words because they don't want to hit those hot buttons. And so now they create parallel lives, right? So now they are just keeping their distance. They are, maybe they're a great team when it comes to finances and the kids and everything. But when it comes to that level of vulnerability of sharing and connecting, it stops there. So that next stage that we go into is vision, right? And this, Gene, he used the example of a bathing suit and being in the bathing suit.
Yeah. So, if we're in the house, now we're in their kitchen, and kitchen is a very wonderful place to be invited into. That's where families gather. That's where we're safe together. And we consider you in our inner circle, right? You think about how many kitchens have you been invited in? And when we're there, we're going to share more vulnerable things, like about our visions and our dreams and what we want to create in our life. And it's very vulnerable because if we say, I'd really love to have, this horse farm that does, therapeutic stuff with people that, we know helps them, and it's not safe, you will never create that dream. That dream can be shut down in an instant. Our words are so impactful, both in uplifting and in tearing down. And if you're not careful where you share your dreams, you could get really stuck in your life and, like you said, go back to those video games where no one's going to bug you and not do anything with your life, because it is a risk and it is difficult. And for sure, if you're going to create a dream in your life, you will fall down multiple times before you can say, okay, I think this is kind of working. Right.
And in this stage, this is where, John Gottman talks about contempt and criticism. Well, this is really where it flourishes between a couple.
Mm-hmm.
If you don't have that vision, or you don't have respect for your partner's vision, then that is where you can, criticize them. That's where you can make fun of them. That's where you can label them in a very negative way. And so this is, as you can see, when you go deeper and deeper into these stages of vulnerability, that's where the risk really increases. Right? There's risk of being hurt, risk of rejection, risk of abandonment. And so if it's not safe enough to go into these deeper levels of vulnerability, couples stop. They prevent that from happening. They put these guards up and everything because they don't want to be hurt.
Right. And I was just thinking about this one before that was beliefs. And if when you first, are starting to talk about beliefs, and when you find out there is a belief that you guys maybe don't agree upon, but you don't know how to compromise because of what Jean, you said about earlier trauma from your childhood, then of course you can't even feel comfortable about sharing the vision or all this or that.
Especially if you have a vision. Let's say one person in a relationship wants to take some time off and write a book or start a business. And the other person is like, not fair. I'm going to work. I'm doing this. And then they get 6 months into it and they're like, you see, you haven't made any money. You haven't done this. You're not. And before they even get to a place where they can even know if it's successful or not, the other person is fearful, right? It's a fear we have naturally that, I'm supposed to buy into you, but you don't even know the outcome, because that's what dreams are. That's what all this is about what we're creating. So it's vulnerable for both people.
Right. And I see this, what you're just saying, in a lot of younger couples who are having babies, maybe 2 or 3, and the mom stays home, and how that,
That's a very difficult relationship to resolve, because neither one really understands the other person's life.
Nor do they take the time to do that. Right. And so then they have these preconceptions of what is happening at work. You're just hanging out with your buddies and, having drinks and networking, and you're just at home and you're sitting around on TV and you're not really doing anything. And so it separates the couple even more, and it drives a wedge. Whereas, generations ago, those were set roles. They were static roles, and everyone they knew the value set of both roles. Right. But nowadays, because these roles have been redefined and they're not static,
undefined.
and they're not static. Now there's so much more role confusion. And so couples don't know how to balance that. They don't know how to find the value in these multiple roles that they're able to take on. And
including the communal support. When my mom was a stay-at-home mom, every mom was a stay-at-home mom. And, we all had that. And if somebody was sick, the rest of the neighborhood brought the casserole, or whatever that was to support that. And now a lot of single moms or single dads, there's dads that stay home too. They're very isolated. And it's like, well, my kid's got a nap, so I can't drive 20 minutes. Whereas when we were kids, everyone in the neighborhood on the same street was out. Your kid was in the house sleeping. You could still have a cup of tea.
Now throw social media into the mix, and that's a pot of just mess. And speaking of that vision, it saddens me to see some marriage groups. There was literally I believe it was a woman who was saying, my husband's 40 years old and he wants to be a rapper. I think it's so dumb and he needs to da-da-da. And the comments were just horrible. You should leave him. You should divorce him. And I'm like, 1, get off social media. 2, talk to him. You can support your partner in his dream with the realities of how you can live and make money right now. But the first answer to just about it, just leave. And that's so social media
And every
It's
great
it's crazy.
biography story has that,
Mhm.
where there is against all odds, I became the rapper, right?
Right.
Against all odds, I figured out, I navigated this, and I had a person behind me who believed in me, because the rest of the world is not going to believe in you.
And that's really a good reflection of kind of where we're at right now in society and in relationships, is that we're going to turn to other people who have no vested interest in our day in and day out relationship for advice on what we should do. It doesn't impact them if we go get divorced and leave the person, right?
Right.
You have to deal with the ramifications of that. And so it makes more sense for you to be working this out with your partner who has a vested interest, in being co-parents from that point forward. Or, it's this reversal of where we are putting our investment and time that is causing a lot more problems.
And we forget that, we came on this planet to become, not to pay bills and not to work a certain job and not to just, do that. We're supposed to become, we're supposed to be more. And our fear stops that. Our fear drives us into certainty instead of into creation. And all creation comes through chaos. And all chaos is uncertain and doesn't feel good. But if we can be supported by just one person on this planet, we can do amazing things. I mean, there was someone who was like looking up at the moon like, hey, I want to go up there. And if we believe, we know if we believe enough and we keep at it, we make that happen. And it's so easy to tear this down before it even gets from this non-physical place into this world.
And when we're talking about that support from another human being, we have that next stage, which is feelings. But what we're talking about is that inner bullseye, which is what we call the inner sanctum. And you think about just an inner sanctum, and what that word really brings about is that total safety, right? Carl Jung talked about us having a shadow side of ourselves and a sacred side of ourselves. And we aspire to always show the sacred side to the world, right? We don't want to show the shadow self of ourselves. We don't want that because we are fearful of being rejected. And so within that inner sanctum, we have so much safety with our partner that we are able to show both sides and feel supported and feel accepted. That is the level of vulnerability that all couples have this potential of creating. And obviously you could see how much work is needed to actually be there.
We talk about the analogy of a child learning how to walk. And they take a terrible, wobbly little itty bitty step and everyone goes, yay, you did a great job, and gives them encouragement. And nobody says to them, you know what, if you get up, you're going to fall down again. You're going to probably bump your head. Bad things are going to happen. Just stay there and I'll just bring you everything for the rest of your life. And that's how we learn as human beings. We fall down.
Right.
And we want to protect ourselves from being seen falling down. And we don't want our partner to ever fall down. We want them to be that pillar that, helps us feel certainty. But we never go anywhere if we do that. Anywhere, and that is all part of it. The falling down, the getting back up, the making a fool out of yourself, trying something new.
And the recovery from that and healing from that, right? All couples are going to face conflict. All of them are going to hurt each other. That's inevitable, right? It's not if, it's when. And so how can you recover from that? How can you heal each other? How can you become stronger through adversity together? And that is the building of that inner sanctum.
One of the things that has changed us as a culture is our school system. And our school system says have a plan, right? So when you're in kindergarten, you're prepping for college, right? And you got to have all this and all that. And there's no place for that freedom and that creativity to become. So we're so over intellectualized through education and so underdeveloped in our emotional self and in our spiritual creative self. And we forget that has such a value. And so if we go back to your example of the guy that wants to be a rapper, it's like, well, why? what's the point? Is it to make money? Is it to whatever the point is? And it's like, no, it's to become. Right. And we can't put that on a piece of paper and say, well, that's a SMART goal, and here's how we're going to measure that. And it's something else that is so much more valuable. And relationships are the same way. And to just protect yourself and walk away from a relationship so you don't get hurt, it leads to anxiety and depression and loneliness and the most painful way of being on our planet. Instead of, oh, I'm going to face this person who just hurt me. Mm-hmm. I'm going to let them know.
Not me. I don't do that.
and I'm going to let them know, hey, if you do this again, this is exactly what I'm going to get hurt from again. And now you know for sure. Like maybe if the first time was an accident, how vulnerable is that? Like now you know for sure if you do this, it's going to hit one of my emotional echoes and cause me pain. Mm-hmm. And that's the very point of being vulnerable, is to find that resilience in yourself and to walk through that dark night of the soul that says, maybe as a child, my dad came home 30 minutes late and my mom was anxious and it was a really horrible time. And then we find out later he's having an affair and he leaves the family. Well, now my partner comes home 15 minutes late and I'm in fight or flight and freaking out and shock. Yeah. And he's going, what's the big deal? There was some traffic, because he doesn't feel like he wasn't doing anything wrong.
That's the emotional echo.
But if you go like, oh, I don't want you to feel that way. Well, how do we fix this? Well, maybe you could just send me a text next time saying there's traffic. Mm-hmm. Some of those fixes are kind of easy, but what we do instead is say, I didn't do anything wrong and you're overreacting and how dare you?
This is your problem and you need to get over it.
And validating their feelings.
Yeah.
And if every time someone was going to be late, they were careful with us, if that was one of our wounds, it would heal. We would find that certainty that they're not out there doing anything to hurt us. It's just life kind of got in the way. And sooner or later, 15 minutes would just be 15 minutes.
Mm-hmm. Right. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, these emotional wounds and the emotional echoes, they don't go away with time. Mm-hmm. A physical wound, you get cut, you put a Band-Aid on it and it just heals by itself.
Right.
But emotional wounds, they just sit there and they sit there until you get into a relationship. And that is when they are going to inevitably come up. Mm-hmm. And a couple has this potential of healing it or ignoring it. And then the wound gets worse.
So, what we're talking about is first aid, right? If you cut yourself and you give yourself no first aid, you could have a problem later on down the road. But a little bit of first aid and you can't even stop yourself from healing. Mm-hmm. And so if you don't get emotional first aid in those little wounds along the way in life, or some big wounds along the way in life, then it's this place we have to create, which is our final stage, which is the sanctum. And we live in a world that we need to be conditional in order to be unconditional. And so the condition of a safe relationship says, I'm only going to be your person. Mm-hmm. Or I'm only going to, I'm going to be honest with you. I'm going to be someone you can count on. I'm going to create a condition and we're going to decide that together, these conditions that help each of us feel safe based on whatever type of wounds we might have that other couples might not need, mm-hmm. Right. Whatever those things are. And that's what we call the sanctum. And the sanctum creates a space. So now we're in the bedroom, right? Now we're in the bedroom and we can be emotionally naked, physically naked, because our conditions of safety are there. The judgment, the whatever, our sacredness to our partner, the love they have for us, that they're allowed to unconditionally love us. And we can unconditionally love them because we've created a condition on earth where that can happen. And it's the same thing we need as children. If you unconditionally love your child's going to be a jerk. And if you only have conditions for your child without love, your child's going to be a jerk. Right. And so when we're raising our kids, we're teaching them, when you act this way, it's better, and you can be in the world and you can be respectful of yourself and other people and considerate. And when you do that, it makes it safer to let your guard down and be vulnerable and prepare them to be in these type of relationships.
So you can see what would violate that inner sanctum is bringing anyone else who does not belong in that sanctum into it. So having a friendship, a very close friendship with someone from the opposite gender, right? A coworker, and talking to them about your vulnerable emotions, your feelings, your vision, all of that, and you're not talking to your spouse about that, right? Or bringing in your mother, right? A parent.
Or your children.
Or your children. And so now they become your confidant, and they are now in the sanctum, whereas your partner is the one who should only be in there.
And there's a lot of people in the bedroom that shouldn't be in there, especially we're seeing a lot of people sleeping with their kids, and these kids are not 1 year old. They're 11, 13. And
yeah, sometimes we're seeing parents, like one parent goes to the bedroom of one child, sleeps, and one goes to the other bedroom, and the marital bed is empty.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I also see, besides people add in alcohol or other stuff, or
Sure.
marijuana, which also can be, an effect in that. We do have a question from an audience. What do you do when one loses patience quickly with the other and just goes completely silent?
So we would say that this is an emotional echo. All right. Mm-hmm. And we use also the example of an iceberg. So iceberg is, 15% above the water, 85% under the water. Yes. Right. And when we are dealing with emotional echo, we are seeing in our partner only the 15% above the water. What is happening now? Mm-hmm. But it is related to 85% of history. Okay. And so when you're talking about someone who's losing patience quickly, there is something in the past that this is connected to. There's something that it is related to, right? And it is bringing up that wound that the partner can't see. They're only seeing the 15%, they're only seeing the behavior, okay? And this is the understanding, the depth of understanding that both partners need to get to. Versus saying, I hate it when you do this, and you need to stop it, and we're going to put some rules around that. Well, it just puts a Band-Aid on a bigger problem because you're not addressing the wound underneath.
Okay.
Patience is it's a very gradient type of thing that you need to be careful with. And there are people who might be very unsafe people to try to deal with it on their own. Mm-hmm. And they may have a lot of control issues from being wounded and other things. And for that, you absolutely need to find a third party to help you navigate that kind of stuff, to help correct whatever is unsafe in the relationship. If it's a partner who, you've been able to vet through those other stages, and all of a sudden you're bumping into something, you're like, why is it every time this happens, this isn't like you? One of the first things you can ask that person is, what did you hear me say?
Right.
Because when that hindbrain of ours goes into fight or flight, we get the tunnel vision and the tunnel hearing, and it's like the telephone game, and they heard something completely different that was never said. And so you can't resolve a problem if you're in that heightened place. Mm-hmm. And I remember there was a time in our relationship we were working on that, and we would literally say to each other,
allegedly,
I'm not the one who hurt you. Mm-hmm. Yes. Because nothing was really happening in the relationship. But, it's like when we have that cellular memory, right? So 9/11, 2001, if you were around then, where you were, what day it was, what the temperature was like, who was around you. We have that cellular memory. And what we don't really always know is maybe there was a certain song playing on the radio. And now we're in a space, we hear the song, and all of a sudden we feel that foreboding or that thing. And it's like, why am I having this emotional reaction? Nothing happened.
Right.
Because it's tied that way. And helping your partner untangle that stuff it's very tricky work. It's very delicate work. Mm-hmm. And that's why creating that conditional place, that sanctum that says, this is a safe place to talk about it. And so on that continuum of patience, it can be anywhere from, I need to learn how to do this. is there a desire for your partner to work on it with you? Because you want to make sure it's safe. That safeness is so important than trying to bring it back up to the surface and have that conversation up here. That'll cause a lot of problems, a lot of fights.
Wow. Thank you guys so much for all the information that you guys have just provided. And I love that display of the different, realms.
Mm-hmm.
Yes. So if couples or individuals are listening and they want to do your intensive or meet with you guys or the online work that you guys, tell us, how should we go about knowing how to contact you guys?
Sure. I think the quickest way is to go to couplesynergy.com. That's really where they can access, all of our programs. They can also listen to our podcast, which is pretty much it. Anywhere you listen to podcasts, it's Couple Synergy with real couples, real stories, real relationships. And they can access us on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, everywhere, really.
And we also do free consultations because we always want to make sure it's a good fit and what level of programming people really need. And so that's another thing you can do is go on there and schedule a consultation with us.
All right. And thank you again for being on the show.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks for having us.
Great information.
Yes. Okay. We'll be back in a moment.
Learn to cultivate a deeper connection with yourself and your inner spirit in order to further manifest a more fulfilling, intimate life. Find your purpose in life, develop unwavering confidence, heal your inner child, and authentically live this purpose every day. It starts with you. Couldn't be further from the truth. Intimacy is not taboo, nor should it cost a fortune. Get your copy today. It Starts With You is available on Amazon, Audible, and
Welcome back to the Bringing Intimacy show, where intimacy is real. That was so inspiring.
Yes.
I love how they broke down the vulnerability. I mean, it was another way for me to, think about how, as you take off different layers. And I love how they said, you can't be just vulnerable to everyone. Of course, there's, the
Right.
safety. Yeah. But how, in reality, hurting people hurt people, but we also heal with people, and we can heal in our relationships if we work together in synergy.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I love it. Yeah, this definitely is something that if someone's catching a replay, if they're listening now, it will absolutely spark additional thought process and conversations. That's the most important piece. If one piece of it stuck out and it's like an aha moment, that's super important.
Yes, yeah, definitely. And I know the Relationship 101 home study course that you guys can go online and find out about that. So yes. So what else is coming up?
Well, we have some great shows coming up in the coming weeks. So on October the 20th, we have Chastity Chandler. She is a relationship and sex therapist, and she'll be talking about sexual health and wellness. On the 27th of October, we have Tony and Alyssa DiLorenzo with 6 Pillars of Intimacy. On November the 3rd, we have Carrie Shell with the impact of alcohol on intimacy. That's going to be a really good one. And then on November the 10th, we have Michael Mercucci with reconnecting to our humanity, a much needed connection.
Yes. Well, thank you so much again for co-hosting, and for everyone else, we will see you guys next week at 3:30 on Thursday. And to check us out on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn. This has been the Bringing Intimacy Back show, where intimacy is real.
Bye, everybody.
Thank you for listening to today's episode of Bringing Intimacy Back, where intimacy is real. You can also find us at bringingintimacyback.com, LinkedIn, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and YouTube. Dr. April Brown's 7-book series, Improving Intimacy, is now on Amazon. We'll see you next Thursday at 3:30 p.m. Don't forget to follow, share, and subscribe.